Days before the massive strike, something strange fell from the sky. Not weapons, paper. Millions of leaflets warned Japanese civilians to evacuate immediately. But here's what most people don't know. The reaction wasn't what you'd expect. Some thought it was enemy propaganda. Others believed their leaders would protect them. And a few realized the terrible truth too late. What happened when ordinary people held these warnings in their hands? Why didn't more leave when they had the chance? The answer reveals something shocking about trust during wartime. The warning from above. In the summer of 1945, something unusual happened across Japan. American aircraft flew over cities and dropped millions of pieces of paper. These weren't weapons, they were warnings. The leaflets told civilians to leave their cities immediately. They said a new kind of disruptive technology was coming. The messages were clear and direct. But here's what's interesting. Most people who read them didn't believe a word. Some threw them away without a second thought. Others turned them in to authorities, fearing they'd be accused of believing enemy messages. A few kept them hidden, unsure what to think. The Japanese leadership told citizens these were just tricks meant to create fear. They said nothing could destroy their cities. But what did ordinary people really say when they held these warnings? The truth reveals something unexpected about human nature. What the leaflets actually said. The American leaflets weren't vague threats. They named specific cities that would be targeted. The messages told families to evacuate and protect their loved ones. Some leaflets included maps showing safe zones. Others explained that Japan's military situation was becoming impossible to defend. The wording was carefully chosen to sound urgent but not cruel. American officials believed these warnings would save lives. They thought people would naturally want to protect themselves. But they didn't fully understand Japanese culture at that time. The concept of evacuation wasn't simple. Many families had lived in the same place for generations. Leaving meant abandoning everything they owned. It also meant possibly disobeying their government. And in wartime Japan, disobedience could have serious consequences. So when civilians read these warnings, they faced an impossible choice. What would you have done? The first reactions. When the leaflets first appeared, confusion spread quickly. Many people had never seen anything like this before. Some civilians picked them up out of curiosity. Others walked past them, afraid to even touch enemy materials. In some neighborhoods, police officers collected the leaflets immediately. They didn't want citizens reading foreign messages. But the leaflets kept coming. Day after day, more paper fell from the sky. One woman later recalled thinking they were just enemy attempts to lower morale. A factory worker said he laughed when he first saw one. The idea that entire cities could be destroyed seemed impossible. Japanese citizens had been told their nation was strong. They believed their military would defend them until the end. The government controlled all information. Newspapers never reported losses or setbacks, so when these warnings arrived, most people simply didn't trust them. But a small number began to wonder. Why so few left? The reasons people stayed were complicated. First, there was nowhere safe to go. Rural areas were already struggling with food shortages. Cities were crowded, but at least there were rations and work. Second, leaving meant being seen as a coward. In wartime Japan, loyalty to the nation was everything. Families who evacuated might be viewed as traitors or weak. Third, Many people genuinely believed their government. They'd been told for years that Japan would never surrender. The idea of total destruction seemed like foreign propaganda designed to break their spirit. Fourth, some people simply couldn't afford to leave. They had jobs, responsibilities, and elderly family members who couldn't travel. And finally, there was a psychological factor. When you've lived somewhere your whole life, it's hard to imagine it could simply disappear. People adapt to danger over time. They tell themselves it won't happen to them. This mindset would soon be tested. The ones who believed. Not everyone ignored the warnings. A small number of civilians took the leaflets seriously. Some quietly moved their children to relatives in the countryside. Others began sleeping in bomb shelters every night. A few families packed emergency supplies and kept them ready. But these people rarely spoke about their preparations. Admitting you believed enemy warnings could bring suspicion from neighbors. It could even bring visits from secret police. One man later described hiding his family's evacuation plans from everyone. He told friends they were visiting relatives, not fleeing. Another woman said she felt torn between fear and duty. She wanted to protect her children, but didn't want to abandon her elderly parents. These individuals lived in constant tension. They saw the warnings as real, but couldn't act freely. Many felt isolated, unable to share their fears. Some prayed the warnings were false. Others prepared quietly and hoped for the best. Time was running out faster than anyone realized. What happened next? On August 6, 1945, the city of Hiroshima learned the warnings were real. In an instant, the unimaginable became reality. A single weapon caused unprecedented destruction. The city was devastated in ways no one thought possible. Tens of thousands of lives were lost immediately. Those who survived faced unimaginable conditions. The leaflets had been telling the truth all along. In other cities, people heard the news with shock and disbelief. Some finally understood the warnings they'd dismissed. Others still couldn't process what had happened. 3 days later, Nagasaki experienced the same fate. Another city, another warning that had been ignored. After these events, Japan's leadership finally agreed to end the conflict. The decision came too late for those who could have been saved. Survivors later spoke about the leaflets with deep emotion. Some felt anger at their government for dismissing the warnings. Others felt guilt for not acting sooner. The question that haunted many was simple but painful. Survivor testimonies. Years later, survivors shared what they remembered about the leaflets. One elderly woman said she'd kept one hidden in her home. She remembered the exact words warning about new destructive technology. She said she hadn't fully believed it was possible. A man who was a teenager in 1945 recalled his father collecting the leaflets. His father had wanted to leave, but couldn't convince the extended family. They thought he was overreacting to enemy fear tactics. Another survivor described the moment of realization after the first strike. She said everyone suddenly remembered the paper warnings they'd thrown away. The guilt was overwhelming. Some survivors said they'd been taught that Americans were purely evil. The leaflets contradicted that belief by offering warnings instead of just attacking. This created confusion that made the messages harder to trust. Many struggled for years with the memory of ignored warnings. Their stories reveal a difficult truth about wartime decisions. The lesson that remains.
This historical moment teaches us something important about human behavior. When people are surrounded by one message constantly, opposing information becomes nearly impossible to accept. Japanese civilians weren't foolish for staying. They were living in a system that controlled information and discouraged independent thinking. The leaflets offered truth, but accepting that truth meant questioning everything they'd been told. It meant breaking from their community and risking consequences. Most people in most situations will choose to trust what they already believe. This applies to many moments throughout history. It's not about intelligence, it's about how humans process information during times of fear and uncertainty. The civilians who read those warnings faced an impossible situation. Their reactions remind us that context matters, judgment matters, and sometimes the hardest thing to do is believe a warning that contradicts everything you know. The leaflets dropped before the atomic bomb revealed something profound about wartime psychology. Japanese civilian response wasn't simple ignorance. It was shaped by years of controlled information and fear. These World War II psychological warfare materials offered genuine warnings, but evacuation seemed impossible for most families. The civilian perspective shows how difficult it becomes to accept truth when everything around you says otherwise. This moment in history reminds us that context shapes every decision. Understanding their reaction helps us learn from the past. Sometimes the hardest warnings to hear are the ones we need most.